A 6-year-old girl vanishes in the woods during a picnic. No screams, no footprints. Just 9 empty minutes, and then she was gone. Almost 2 months later, an unmarked package is left at the doorstep. Inside, a pink hair tie, clean, smelling of fresh plastic and utterly impossible to have returned on its own. It's not a message, it's proof. Someone saw. Someone is still close. Franziska jolted awake. Her heart hammered. Cold sweat soaked the nape of her neck and her temples. She'd escaped the nightmare that had haunted her for so many nights. A dream so vivid it felt like every detail still clung to her skin, lingered in her breath. The old clock ticked steadily beside the bed. Outside, the wind slipped through the crack in the window, gently stirring the gray lace curtain like a restless spirit. Henrik lay with his back to her, his breathing heavy but regular, completely detached from the chaotic world Franziska had just left. She sat motionless, her hand clenched on the edge of the blanket, her fingers digging in until they were white. Franziska opened the bedside drawer and took out the sleeping pills. She stared at the blister pack for a long time, her gaze fixed on the small white pills nestled quietly in the plastic. Part of her wanted to find peaceful sleep again, but another part was still afraid the dream would return. She pushed the drawer shut, then sat up straight, her head bowed, as if trying to maintain a fragile balance between dream and reality. In that dream, always that same dream, she stood in a pine forest. Sunlight glittered through the towering branches, casting shadows on the mossy green ground. The air was filled with the scent of resin, strong and sweet. Somewhere, the sound of children's laughter rang out, as clear as silver bells. Lena was running ahead, her pink silk dress billowing. "Lena!" she called, her voice catching in her throat. The little girl turned her head, smiled, and then vanished behind a large tree. Franziska ran after her, her heart feeling like it would burst from her chest. When she rounded the tree, all that was left was a pink hat lying askew on the ground. Her hand touched it. Her fingertips came away sticky with tree sap mixed with something dark. Blood. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, about to shatter. She woke up just then, sitting in the damp darkness, gasping, her hair soaked with sweat. The house was silent except for the wind and the ticking clock. Franziska left the bed and walked slowly into the living room. She rested her forehead against the cold window frame, her eyes staring blankly into the murky darkness outside the forest. There, where it all began, every shadow held the shape of a fear she couldn't name. A memory flooded back, gentle as the morning sun. Henrik had been struggling with a heavy backpack, muttering about forgetting to turn on the GPS. Franziska laughed, catching the water bottle that was about to slip from his hand. Lena ran ahead, her red shoes muddy, her curly hair bouncing in the sun. "Are you my forest angel?" she asked, half joking, half affectionate. "No, I'm a little squirrel," Lena replied, then rolled onto the grass, laughing gleefully. The picnic group gathered around a campfire. They spread out a cloth, put on soft music, and shared slices of toasted bread. Lena picked wildflowers, running back to press a small bouquet of purple blooms into her mother's hand, fragrant. Each moment passed slowly, so warm that no one thought it would be the last. Franziska was cutting watermelon, Henrik was fiddling with the cooler, and the children were playing happily in the woods. No one saw Lena leave the group. When she called the children to eat, all of them returned, except Lena. "Maybe she's playing behind that bush," Henrik said. But he was already standing up, his eyes darting everywhere. A wrinkle appeared between his eyebrows. Franziska hurried towards the edge of the forest, calling out. Silence. Not a word in response. At that moment, the worry hadn't fully formed, but it had already begun to tighten her chest. The early afternoon breeze stirred through the Landesforst forest, rustling the dense pine canopy. The sun was already leaning towards the west. The scent of grilled meat still lingered in the air, and the faint sounds of children playing near the edge of the forest could still be heard. Franziska was folding the tablecloth when she looked up, her eyes scanning quickly. The children were gathered near her folding chair. All of them. But Lena was still missing. She stood up, her gaze not yet worried, just glancing through the tree trunks as if hoping to catch a glimpse of her little brown hair popping out from somewhere. "Lena!" she called, her voice light. She called while walking around the large tree behind the tent. "Lena, Mommy found you. Okay?" No response. The wind in the forest had changed direction, no longer as gentle as before. The pine branches knocked against each other softly like whispers. There was no one answering that call, no echoing laughter, no little footsteps navigating through the moss. A chill ran down her spine. The worry now had shape and sound. It was no longer a hypothesis. It was no longer a mother overthinking. It stood behind her shoulder, breathing lightly on her neck, reminding her that something was wrong, very wrong. A mother who was tying up a trash bag turned around. Maybe she went down to the stream with the other kids. Franziska nodded, walking quickly towards the small slope leading down to the water. Henrik had also just returned from the edge of the forest, smiling faintly. "She's not here," Franziska asked the children, pointing at each one in turn. "Did anyone see Lena? Did anyone go with Lena?" They all shook their heads. A little girl said softly, "I thought she went to find her mom." The atmosphere changed subtly. Henrik frowned, walking quickly in the opposite direction. Franziska stood there for a few seconds, as if waiting for some laughter to erupt from the bushes. But there was only the sound of birds mixed with the wind. She started running, no longer calling softly. "Lena! Lena!" A father took a flashlight from the trunk of his car. That action made the people around him seem to freeze. A look, a shared thought that no one had yet voiced. Nothing there. Henrik returned, breathing heavily. "I've been around all the trails." A mother glanced at her phone. 4:57. Franziska stood motionless, her hands clenched on her shirt. Henrik squeezed her shoulder. Neither of them spoke. The wind became colder. The children whispered, starting to gather near the adults. "Should we call the police?" someone said. No one answered, but everyone's eyes turned to Henrik. 6:12. Henrik pressed the call button. His voice was hoarse, even but dry, as if trying to keep himself from breaking. "We suspect a child has gone missing. Landesforst Forest, south of road number 3. The person on the other end asked repeatedly. Henrik answered concisely, each sentence as if copied from memory. The police asked them to stay in place, not to continue searching without instructions. The location of the disappearance was now a potential crime scene. Everyone stopped. No one took another step, as if each pine tree had now turned into an invisible wall that no one dared to cross. When the police arrived, they brought maps, rulers, and red tape. The forest was divided into sections, each area numbered. They gave flashlights to each group. The adults were invited to leave the search area, and the children were kept in the car. Franziska didn't go anywhere. She sat down on the ground, her shoes covered in damp earth. In her hand, Lena's small pink hat, something that someone had just found under the picnic chair. She squeezed it tightly, her fingers trembling uncontrollably. Henrik stood behind her, leaning against a tree, his head bowed. He used his fingernail to write on the palm of his hand, the lines blurred by sweat. 9 minutes. 9 minutes. From the moment Lena left sight until he returned, in those 9 minutes, maybe she was just hiding behind a tree. Maybe she fell. Maybe she met someone. 9 minutes. Every hypothesis was possible in those 9 minutes. And now, nothing was certain anymore. The Landesforst forest was bathed in the light of the setting sun. The wind still blew through the tall trees, but people had stopped hearing the sound of children's laughter from afar. The only thing that echoed was the fear growing in everyone's heart, a fear that no one dared to name. A command post was set up at the edge of the forest entrance, near the small stream. Red tape connected bamboo stakes, creating a temporary space in which people started each day with hope and ended in silence. Volunteers came, bringing all sorts of things: water bottles, bread, cold medicine, rope, even an old Bible. An old white-haired woman quietly knelt by the stream, her fingers on her rosary, her lips moving in prayers that were almost inaudible. No one told her to stand up. Everyone understood. If there was a mother who had ever lost a child, she was the one who understood best what was happening. In the post, the police spread out a large map attached to a wooden wall. Red pins marked the area that had been searched, the squares overlapping, mixed up. Every day, a new group of people was assigned to carry drones, heat detectors, GPS. Every evening, they returned, quietly erasing hope from the map and repeating it all the next day. Franziska carried a small notebook. At first, she only intended to record times, locations, who had asked. But then other lines appeared, interrupting. Lena is 1.7 meters tall, has slightly curly hair. Her laughter is like silver bells. Another day. She's not good at running fast. She often gets her left and right hands mixed up. She doesn't like the dark. The notes became a way for her to hold on to the little girl, every small detail, as if afraid that if she didn't write it down, her memory would betray her. As if anyone found this notebook, they would understand Lena better, understand her enough to find her. Henrik was completely different. He didn't write, didn't record anything, just walked around the camp, never straying more than a few hundred meters. His eyes were sunken, his hair tangled and flat with dampness. Once, when a volunteer placed a blue plastic cup down, Henrik shouted, almost panicked, This is it! The cup Lena uses. She left it here." Everyone was silent. The cup clearly still had traces of the lunchtime soup. Since that day, no one dared to approach Henrik except Franziska. But even she didn't touch him. They sat a distance apart, under the tarp, listening to the wind blowing through the forest and the sound of walkie-talkies calling each other in code. One evening, Franziska whispered, "Do you remember the sound of her laugh?" Henrik didn't answer, just looked straight into the forest, through the gap between two large trees, as if he just looked long enough, that tiny figure would appear, turn her head, smile and say, "Here I am, Mommy." But nothing. Franziska wanted to touch his shoulder, as she once had, but her hand couldn't lift. Her body felt stiff, from a pain that was too familiar to cry and too deep to express. On the 10th day, a psychologist in a gray raincoat came to see Franziska privately. She spoke softly, her voice gentle. "You should go home and rest for a few days. Get some sleep. Regain your strength." Franziska shook her head. "I can't rest until I find her," the doctor continued. "Lena could come back at any time." Henrik didn't interfere. He just stood there, looking at his wife for a long time, as if engraving every detail of her face into his heart, then nodded slightly. They didn't hug, didn't say goodbye. Franziska just turned her back, walking slowly out of the camp, the notebook still pressed tightly against her chest. Henrik turned around, sat down in the same place, by the extinguished fire. The sky wasn't completely dark, but the color of the sky had already started to darken. And like pine roots burrowing under the ground, loss began to take root in their hearts. No longer fear, no longer hope. Just an emptiness, shapeless, but as present as the wind through a thin shirt. No one saw it, but everyone knew it was there. The third week after Lena disappeared, the command post at the edge of the forest no longer looked like a temporary shelter. It had turned into a real field base. Electrical wires ran crookedly on the ground. New tents were erected behind to serve as a rotating rest area for the search team. Every morning, a small military vehicle brought coffee and food. Every evening, flashlights flickered like fireflies in the darkness of the forest. And then, like a small crack in the prolonged silence, new information began to spread, not from the sound of walkie-talkies, but from the whispers between the search teams. A couple living in the neighboring village had come to see the investigator on Tuesday morning. The man, middle-aged, wearing a worn baseball cap, said that on the day of the picnic, he had seen a moss green truck parked on the trail to the north. Very old. Couldn't see the license plate clearly, but one of the taillights was cracked, he emphasized. At that time, I thought it was a forest ranger's car, but the way it was parked and then started up and drove away as soon as it saw me, it didn't seem right. Franziska didn't go to the testimony. She didn't want to. Not because she didn't care, but because the strange faces made her unbearable. Henrik went instead of her. He sat in the small meeting room next to the largest tent with the two main investigators. One person spoke, the other took notes. The police began to search through the traffic cameras near the area, but the signal was weak, some of the equipment was old, and the images obtained were just blurred shadows passing through the frame, not clear enough to identify. Some video clips were rewound and replayed, stopping at each blurry car moving between the trees. But then, they were quickly classified as unclear. They marked the suspicious forests on the map. Each point was encoded with its own symbol, printed into a large format map hanging in the command post. Henrik asked for a copy. He took it home, pasting it on the wall opposite the dining table, right in the empty house where only two people lived like ghosts. Franziska looked at that map every time she passed by, but never stopped. In the morning, she woke up very early. The house didn't need an alarm anymore. No one slept deeply enough to need a bell. Lena's pink coat still hung right by the door, where Henrik told her to put it away every day. But Franziska still kept it there. She said, "So it's easy to grab if it's cold and she comes back unexpectedly." Lena's small bicycle was set up in the corner of the porch, the rear tire slightly flat. Every morning, Franziska took a cloth to wipe the seat and handlebars, as if the child was just going somewhere and would be back to continue riding around the yard. At exactly 4:40 p.m. every day, she looked at the clock, then got up. There was no specific purpose. It was just that that moment seemed to mark an invisible division in the day. Before 4:40, it was still possible to hope. After that, it was another day passing without anything changing. External pressure began to rise. The media came, initially a local channel, then vehicles carrying equipment with the logos of major stations. The police set up a separate area to serve as a media area, but couldn't prevent the camera lights and probing looks. Once, when she saw a young reporter pointing a camera at the wooden house, Henrik rushed out. No one knew what he intended to do, only saw a police officer quickly stop him before things went too far. Franziska didn't go outside anymore. She stayed in the house, sitting by the kitchen window, watching the shadows of the trees cast on the brick floor. Sometimes she lit candles, placing them under Lena's photo frame. But most of the time she didn't do anything at all. Just sat, listening to time pass by each small tick from the old clock in the living room. On the 21st night, Henrik opened his email as usual. All strange addresses were opened immediately, although most were just spam or meaningless advice from strangers. But this email had an attached photo, no title, just a line of text under the photo. "I used to see it around here. A long time ago. Someone lives in the forest." The car in the photo was indeed moss green, muddy, blurred. But there was clearly something haunting about the way it was parked on the side of the road, as if waiting for someone. Henrik printed out the photo, not saying anything to Franziska right away. He just sat looking at it for a long time, then folded the paper, stuffing it into his coat pocket. That night, he didn't sleep. And somewhere in the Landesforst forest, suspicion began to take root. They were not loud, not fierce. They crept like mold in damp wood, eating deep bit by bit. No one spoke it out loud, but everyone's eyes changed. No longer simply hope, not despair, but something, flickering between those two extremes, like mist on the ground, both cold and blurred, and impossible to grasp. The 38th day. The Landesforst forest in early June had a strange silence. No longer too cold, but the morning mist still clung thinly to every patch of grass. The police returned to the scene in larger numbers than usual. Some said this was the last effort before they reduced the scale of the search. Others whispered that there was a clue. A group of K9 units was brought in. They moved between the old trails with almost no new hope. Everything had been disturbed too much. But then, when they approached the wasteland to the northwest, one dog suddenly stopped. It made a short hiss, its nose pressed to the ground, stepping back a few steps, then circling back, as if some smell had just hit its senses head-on. A patch of grass lay flat, in a direction sloping diagonally towards the highway. The grass was not completely broken, but clearly someone or something had moved through. An officer bent down, running his hand through each layer of dewy grass, touching something soft under the ground. A piece of rotten fabric, small, not enough to determine its origin. They found 3 such pieces, scattered within a few meters. No blood, no hair, no DNA. Henrik was present that day. He stood in the middle of the wasteland, his eyes wide open, not blinking once, as a young officer held a shovel, turning over each piece of land. Nothing, just damp earth, tree roots, and small worms awakened from their sleep. Henrik didn't say anything. When the police waved to signal that it was done, he just nodded, then turned away. Every step he took seemed to press down on the ground with all the weight of a person who had nothing left to hope for, but also didn't know how to stop. That night, when he got home, he didn't eat dinner, didn't change his clothes, just went into the living room, sat by the wall, and before lying down on the couch, he reached out and knocked on the wooden wall 9 times. No more, no less. Franziska heard it from the bedroom. She didn't ask. She didn't need to ask. 9 times, from when Lena disappeared to when he returned. She didn't go to the scene that day. At home, she did something no one asked for. Used a tape measure to remeasure the doorframe where Lena used to stand for her mother to record her height. The old pencil mark was still there, a thin horizontal line dated April 2nd, 107 centimeters. Franziska placed her fingertip on the pencil mark, as if to confirm that it was really there. But as soon as her finger touched the wood, she pulled back. It felt like touching hot coals. On the dining table, Lena's photo frame was still placed between 2 small candles. Franziska had changed the photo. No longer a birthday photo, but a photo taken in a hurry during the picnic trip. The one where Lena frowned because she was caught off guard. She was chewing, her cheeks puffed up like a squirrel, her eyes darting to the side. That expression wasn't beautiful, but it was lively. That day, an old man came to the police station. He brought a pot of tea, saying that he just wanted to say something small. "A few years ago," he said, "I used to go get firewood in the forest behind the northern trail. Once I saw a wooden shack, built very simply. Someone lived in it for a while, but then disappeared. No one has come back." A young officer nodded, taking notes as he always did when people came to tell old stories. No one reacted much. Even the old man himself admitted that he didn't remember the location clearly. But that afternoon, when Lieutenant Marin, who had more than 20 years in the industry, glanced at the summary, he stopped for a few seconds longer than usual. "Wait. I've read about this somewhere." He asked his assistant to find the archived files from the Landesforst Area Forestry Unit, which was not synchronized with the state police's main data. It took nearly 3 hours of filtering through old paper reports before they found a name noted faintly in black ink: Hans Bork. This man had been recorded as living in an illegally built shack on the edge of the forest in the winter a few years ago. No fixed address, no serious criminal record, just a few warnings for trespassing to ask for shelter from the rain. The document showed that he disappeared from the record after 2019. No declaration of leaving the area. No one knew where he went. That night, Lieutenant Marin entered that name into the old SIM and vehicle tracking system. After a few blocks, a piece of data appeared. A license plate that had been attached to Hans Bork, Old Moss Green. It partially matched the photo of the car that the anonymous citizen had sent to Henrik in an email a few weeks ago. For the first time in many weeks, a real trace began to emerge, not from a miracle, but from the old memory of an old man, and the only person who was still patient enough to believe that vague memories could also save a deeply buried truth. Evening. Franziska heard a car stop in front of the door. She went to open it. No one there. Just a small package, wrapped in brown paper. No sender address, only her name handwritten in blue ink. Her hands trembled as she opened the package. Inside was a very small object, a neon pink hair tie. The kind with a small plastic bow, Franziska remembered very well. Lena used to wear it all last summer vacation. Once, the little girl dropped it under a stone bench in the park, and Henrik picked it up for her, joking, "This is so bright, you can probably see it from a satellite." She picked up the hair tie. Her mind seemed completely blank for a few seconds. Then suddenly, like a lid popping open too hard, Franziska screamed. The sound was sharp, piercing, and high, shattering in the small house. Like a glass being thrown on the floor. No preparation, no restraint. It erupted from the deepest part of her chest, where for more than a month there had only been empty spaces and silence. Then silence. There were no words after that. No more footsteps, not even breathing. Henrik rushed in from the back porch, the door still swaying. He saw Franziska standing as if frozen, her hand drooping, the neon pink hair tie lying on the table like a cut in the palm of her hand. Her eyes didn't look at him, just looked at the hair tie, the small, insignificant object that had once been on their daughter's hair on the last morning she was alive. He didn't ask her where she got it, didn't touch it either. Henrik walked over, pulling his wife's shawl over her shoulders. His hand touched her hand, cold as frost-covered iron. Franziska whispered, very softly, as if talking to herself. It wasn't at home. She took it with her that day. No one needed to confirm. Henrik understood immediately. They had never found this item during the searches. Not a lost object, not swallowed by the forest. It had been taken away, and now returned by someone, nameless, unmarked. The police arrived 2 hours later, wearing gloves and special nylon bags. The person in charge of recording the minutes, his hands shaking slightly as he placed the item in the sealed bag. From that moment on, the case was no longer treated as a case of missing child. An emergency internal meeting was opened. The superiors concluded there were clear signs of kidnapping, and now, possibly murder. Everyone realized someone had been watching, someone close enough to know the house address, someone sick enough to send back an object reminiscent of the child, not to help, but to prove. I'm still here. Franziska sat in the living room all night, without sleeping. Henrik sat outside in the yard, in front of the doorstep, like a gatekeeper between two worlds, the world of things that were once normal, and the world where nothing was the same anymore. On the 48th day, a convoy of unmarked official vehicles entered the command post area next to the Landesforst forest. The state investigation team had arrived. Unlike the previous groups, they didn't bring heat cameras or loudspeakers, nor did they hand out handles or red tape. These people were silent, walking in groups, each person wearing a large cloth bag. Inside were paper maps, notebooks, and old but well-maintained equipment. One of them was a geological map of the Landesforst forest from 30 years ago, yellowed, full of symbols that no one remembered the meaning of anymore. The investigation team immediately divided into 3 groups according to the testimony of the old man who came to the abandoned shack. There was no calling each other, no signal horns. They went silently, crossing each layer of terrain like craftsmen searching for water veins under the stone. Henrik went with the southwest group. He didn't say anything, just asked to go along, not like a family member begging, but like a person carrying out the last part of his responsibility. He carried in his coat pocket a small object, the star-shaped hairpin that Lena had dropped during the picnic exactly 3 months ago. After nearly 2 hours of wandering in the forest, they stopped in a depression. The trees were denser than usual, and there was suddenly a very strange smell. Strong, pungent, mixed with damp ashes and something that shouldn't be in the middle of the forest. The shack appeared as if rising from the ground. The corrugated iron roof was rusty, tilted, the wooden planks were covered in mud, and rusted nails were deeply embedded in the cracks. The door was tied with a wire, crossed like someone's knot who used to come in and out often. An officer untied the wire, carefully pushing the door open. Henrik stood next to him, not moving. Inside was darkness. A damp, fishy smell hit people that made them hold their breath. There were signs of life. A corner of the room had a few pieces of half-burnt wood, a pile of ashes mixed with rotten paper, a few old sacks arranged as a bed. And in the middle of that pile, something wrapped in a tattered blanket, rolled up, its shape unclear. The youngest person in the group turned away. The captain nodded. Henrik stepped in, slowly, like someone entering his home after a season of absence. He knelt down, taking out the light pink hairpin from his coat pocket, put it on the pile of ashes, neatly. Not a sob, not a tear, only sunken eyes, looking not at that object, but at a vague point in space, as if Lena was standing there, with her curly hair and a look like the sun. Forensics was dispatched immediately that day. Preliminary conclusion: female child, about 6 to 8 years old, body in a state of third-degree decomposition. Under the skull, there was a sign of serious injury, consistent with a blunt impact object. DNA matched the Berger family sample. Child's name: Lena Berger. At the rescue station, Franziska sat on the wooden steps all morning. Gray wool shirt, hair in a loose bun, her hand holding her old notebook. When the news was reported, she didn't scream, didn't ask, just looked up towards the forest. Her eyes seemed to be pulled by some force from the ground. The last time she turned to where her daughter used to call her mother in the wind. Night fell faster than usual. On the screen in the command room, old traffic camera data was finally processed using new recognition software. In a small frame, a moss green truck could be seen, matching the description. The driver, face unclear, but the SIM signal in that area at the same time matched a name that had been recorded: Hans Bork. This name had been arrested in 2003 for approaching a minor at a park. No prison sentence, just monitored for a short time. No one expected him to disappear into the forest, living outside the system, building a private world that no one knew about. Now that name became the focus again. An arrest warrant was issued that night. When a reporter found her and asked Franziska, "Do you have anything to say at this time?" She turned her head, her eyes dry. Not angry, not hateful. There was only a streak of something gloomy like the morning mist drifting in her pupils. Then she replied softly, as if asking herself, "Now I just want to know, are her hands cold?" No one answered that question, and no one dared to answer. In the Landesforst forest that night, it rained lightly. Not big enough to erase the traces, but enough to make every tree, every piece of rotten wood make a small moan. Like someone, from a world that no longer belonged to, was whispering things that had not had time to say. The 129th day. The sky wasn't completely bright yet. A small gas station located between the deserted road near the border of Rhineland-Palatinate and Saarland was still quiet. The neon lights in the booth were dim, casting a gray-blue light on the automatic coffee shelves. A tall, thin man with slightly hunched shoulders walked into the booth, not taking off his hat, not taking off his thick, faded coat. He chose a black coffee, pressed the button. When the cup was just filled, he took a dry bread from his coat pocket, the cheap packaged kind. Didn't look at anyone, didn't say a word. The other people in the booth, drivers, staff, didn't pay him much more attention than a glance. Until 3 men in civilian coats walked in, spreading out like a fan. No screaming, no chasing. One person approached from behind, gently touching his shoulder. "Are you Hans Broek?" The man turned his head, his eyes not surprised. He nodded. When handcuffed, he didn't struggle, just said softly, his voice almost whispering. No one was sure if he was talking to himself. "You guys are too late." In the escort vehicle, he didn't look outside. His eyes were on the void, where the glass reflected him. A gray figure, shapeless, silent. At the interrogation room in Mainz, Hans Borke said nothing for 17 days. Not a word, not a reaction. He ate 3 meals regularly, slept on time, didn't smash, didn't threaten. Sometimes sat quietly, looking at the ceiling-mounted camera, as if that was the only thing that still recognized him as a real person. The police didn't dare to look at him for too long. There was something about the way he sat, shoulders slumped, hands on his knees, not exactly surrendering, also not exactly self-controlled, that made people feel chilled. Investigator Mertz was assigned to be directly in charge. He wasn't the youngest person on the team, also not the oldest, but he was the only one who could endure silence as part of the job. Mertz began reading the file from the beginning. The old lines from the orphanage recorded that Hans Borke was left in front of the gate of the Fürstenwald orphanage at the age of 3. No papers, just a black and white photo with the words Hans, 1-year-old on the back. In the first medical record, it was recorded, "Initial depression, avoids contact. Often hurts his hands by biting his wrists while sitting alone." At the age of 15, Hans reported to the nurse that he had been raped by a guard in the storage room behind the institute. No one believed him. The internal report said, "Has a tendency to make up stories to get attention." After that, deviant behavior began to appear. He had been caught sneaking into a kindergarten in the middle of the night, not taking anything, not hurting anything, just sitting quietly in the middle of the room, surrounded by tiny tables and chairs. The reason when asked, "There's no one talking there." Mertz read to that part, sitting quietly for quite a while. He didn't write anything, just took his hand to lightly fold the file, as if holding the image of an empty room and a lost child sitting in the middle. Throughout the 17 days, Bork didn't open his mouth, but all his activities were as regular as a machine, as if he was living in a private world where being imprisoned was no different from living an ordinary life. An associate of Mertz brought an exhibit found in his old truck, a student notebook, the hardcover torn at one corner. Inside, there were no words, only drawings of people's heads, each face missing eyes. Round, empty, hundreds of heads not looking at anyone. A page in the middle was torn, with tooth marks on the edge of the paper. Mertz turned each page, then stopped at the end of the notebook, where there were 3 lines in pencil, written crookedly as if someone was learning to write when no one was teaching. "If no one sees me, then I don't appear, but if looked at, I'm a mistake." On the 18th day, Mertz wrote in the internal diary, "Hans is not a cold-blooded person in the traditional sense. He is a person with structural defects from childhood, like a house built without a foundation. No one fixed it, no one supported it, and now it collapses in silence." When analyzing the behavior, Mertz realized something strange. All the traces around the case showed that Bork didn't kill because of hatred or pleasure. There was no torture, no filming, no archiving, just trying to make an eye disappear. As if, when Lena looked at him, looking up blankly, not speaking, not afraid, he panicked, unable to bear the feeling of being seen as a stain. Mertz didn't write that in the report. He just typed it on his personal computer as a temporary conclusion. And then, when a journalist specializing in criminal psychology proposed asking for an interview with Borke, not for media purposes but to understand, Mertz was the only one who nodded. The police hesitated, but finally, they agreed. The interrogation room this time was completely different. No two-way mirror, no neck microphone, just 2 chairs, a small iron table, and lighter than usual lighting. Fluorescent lights were replaced with table lamps, with a pale yellow light like in an old kitchen. Police Officer Mertz stood outside, on the other side of the newly installed safety glass, this time to protect the person facing Hans Borke. Anna Roth walked in. She wore a thin coat, her hair in a low bun, not carrying a pen or notebook. She had memorized all the content she needed to ask, but knew she wouldn't use much of it. She sat down, placing her hands on the table. Her left hand was shaking slightly. Hans Borke had been sitting there from before, as if he didn't need an invitation. He looked up at Anna as soon as she walked in, not smiling, not blinking much. His eyes were no longer panicked, but a look, familiar with being looked at, like a wild animal learning not to flinch when someone walks past the cage. There were no questions in the first few minutes, no introduction, no warm-up. When Anna took a breath to speak, Hans spoke first. The first time I saw her, the little girl was sitting picking moss on the rocks. His voice was slightly hoarse, almost in his throat, as if the vocal cords had never been used properly. I stood behind the tree, not moving, not daring to breathe heavily. My hand was in my coat pocket, holding the keychain, like a toy axe. Anna didn't ask anything, just looked. She wasn't like the other kids, Hans continued. She was quiet. Her eyes looked at the moss like she was reading a book. She wasn't afraid to get dirty. No one called her. I thought, if I touched her, something inside me would stop. But it didn't. It didn't stop. His voice didn't rise, didn't fall. Each word seemed to be pulled from a deep pit in his chest. She turned around. Her eyes were round like 2 drops of water, but they were dry. I thought she would cry, but she didn't. Her eyes just looked. No anger, no hate, just looked. And that look made me see I was something that shouldn't be. Hans raised his hands in front of his face, turning his palms out as if examining them in the light. I didn't hate her. Number. But I couldn't stand that look, as if she saw me. Really. As a stain. Anna was still silent, not taking notes. She let the space between the sentences be drawn out like a silent piece of music. I told her about the black butterfly. I saw a real butterfly flying. I thought, if I talked about it, things wouldn't be so scary. But the little girl stepped back. She was going to scream. I covered her mouth. My hands don't have nails, but she bit hard. I panicked, and I pushed her. Hans inhaled, a long, slow breath, not because of emotion, but because he needed air. Her head hit the tree root, not hard. I thought so, but she didn't move anymore. He lowered his head, the first time throughout the conversation. His hands were still resting, his eyes looking down. I felt for her pulse, couldn't feel anything. I thought I was wrong. I shook her, but instead of fear, I felt relief. No one was looking at me anymore. No more light in her eyes. Anna tilted her head slightly, intending to say something, but Hans continued. There was a light in her throat when she opened her mouth. Not real, but I saw it, like a small flashlight shining from the inside out, so bright it was maddening. I thought, if I covered it up, that light would turn off. The sentence stopped for a long time. I put her in the old blanket, the one I used to hibernate. I took ashes, scattered them on her, to give her something warm. I didn't know what else to do. Anna sat opposite him, her notebook resting on her lap. Her voice was low, trying to remain calm. Why did you send that hair tie? What did you want them to know? Hans Borke tilted his head, his gaze not focused on her, but fixed on a thread coming loose on his sleeve. He twisted it between his fingers, as if playing with a living thing. I didn't send it because I missed her. Also not to threaten, he replied, his voice absent-minded. Then, why? Anna asked again, this time quieter. He looked up. His eyes were empty, with no sign of ordinary emotion. Because I wanted to know. If she still hurt. If she hurt, then that means she was still alive. Anna paused, her lips parted as if to say something, but then closed. Hans continued, as if explaining something completely logical. I've never understood people. They love, they hug, they cry. But all those things, I can't understand them at all. You know, pain is the only thing I see as real. So you wanted them to hurt? Anna almost whispered. Hans smiled slightly, crookedly. When they hurt, I feel like I exist. Like someone finally touched me. There was nothing after that. Hans sat still. Anna did too. When she stood up, the chair creaked softly. Her hand touched the edge of the table, trembling. She didn't say anything. No greeting. No thank you. Just turned and left the room. The door opened. The light outside the hallway was brighter. Mertz stood there, his hands in his coat pockets. Are you okay? He asked softly. Anna nodded, but didn't look at him. She looked up at the ceiling, then towards the shadow of the trees through the small window. Her breathing slowed, but her eyes were still wet. Not because of fear, but because a very difficult-to-name feeling was rising from her chest. There was a moment, she whispered. I thought I saw a part of myself in him. Mertz tilted his head, not asking further. Anna didn't continue. She reached out to wipe her forehead, even though there was no sweat, then gripped her purse strap tightly, as if she needed something to hold on to reality. Mertz added, his voice as if for himself. He is someone who should never be touched, and now, no one wants to touch him anymore. Behind the door, Hans was still sitting, not nodding off, not sleeping. His eyes were open, looking into the void. The light in the baby's throat was no longer there, but another light. The light from the hidden stories, the wounds covered in ashes, the houses without foundations, still burned. Anna turned and walked away, but not quickly. She walked as if leaving a place where space had been distorted, where words had the weight of metal, and silence was as long as a lifetime. Quietly. No one wanted to look, but never extinguished. The city courthouse opened early that day. It was raining lightly, the kind of rain that wasn't enough to wet your clothes but made anyone getting out of the car shiver. In the courtroom, people arranged the chairs in neat rows, white tape separating the aisles from the gallery seats. No cameras, no reporters, just the sound of shoes touching the cold stone floor and the musty smell of paper characteristic of files that have passed through dozens of hands. Henrik and Franziska came together, but like two lines that never touched. They sat next to each other, but no one looked at each other. Henrik bowed his head, his hands clasped tightly, his knuckles white. Franziska sat upright, her eyes looking straight ahead, a faint swelling at the corner of her eye like remaining evidence of a sleepless night. The door opened. Hans Bork was brought in. He wore a gray prison coat, his hair cut short, his eyes as empty as a windowless wall. No handcuffs, according to the rules. But he didn't move even once. His eyes glanced across the room, not stopping at anyone, then stopping at the stone floor in front of the judge's stand. The trial took place faster than people thought. The evidence was read again. Short, clear. Forensics, pictures, investigation report. No one objected. No one stood up. No one argued. All as if it had been arranged in advance, like a funeral rite instead of a prosecution. When it came to the sentencing, the judge, an old man with a warm voice, only read a few lines. Life imprisonment, no possibility of parole. The court acknowledges the psychological circumstances of the defendant, but cannot use that as a reason to mitigate the act of taking the life of a 6-year-old child. No one in the room applauded. There were no sobs, just a light breeze stirring the curtain behind the judge, as if time was too tired to move. Franziska stood up before the last sentence was read, not turning her head, not bowing, not trembling. She left the courtroom like someone who had just escaped a room with no oxygen, walking through the long hallway without needing anyone to guide her. Bork looked up for the first time during the session. He looked at Franziska and Henrik, then said, as if to himself, I thought your daughter was the most beautiful child I'd ever seen, but the light was too bright." No one replied. Not a cough. No one had any room left to place more anger. No one replied. Not a cough. No rustling paper. No one had any room in their heart to place more anger, except Henrik. He stood up abruptly. The sound of the chair hitting the wooden floor rang out like a gunshot. It only took a heartbeat for him to rush to the protective fence between the courtroom. A police officer tried to grab his shoulder, but Henrik brushed him off like a storm. "You bastard!" he shouted, his voice harsh and hoarse, then threw a punch at Bork across the distance of the railing. The punch didn't hit, but it was close enough to make Bork's head jerk back slightly, and his eyes, for a moment, wavered. Franziska didn't cry out, didn't stop him. She stood up, but didn't go forward. Just looked. Two other police officers rushed over, holding Henrik tightly from both sides. He struggled for a few seconds, then collapsed, panting as if he had just run from a fire. His eyes were still burning, but his hands trembled, not because of anger, but because of helplessness, because a word could explode years of resilience. Bork didn't say anything more. He bowed his head again as before, his eyes not blinking. In the courtroom, no one dared to say anything anymore. Franziska looked towards Henrik, then at Borka. Her eyes were no longer those of a broken mother, but like someone who had seen the devil with her own eyes and chose to never let him enter her mind again. When Henrik and Franziska left the courtroom, they walked next to each other. No one said anything at first, only heard the sound of shoes lightly touching the cold stone steps. The winter sun had risen high, but the light still seemed to be filtered through a gray glass. Henrik breathed out a long breath, as if he had just lifted a heavy object that had been weighing on his chest for many months. His hand hung limply by his side, but just a few steps later, he leaned slightly. And for the first time in a long time, his hand touched Franziska's elbow lightly. She didn't pull her hand away. They continued to walk like that, not holding hands, but that gesture was enough for Franziska to stop a little, tilting her head to look over. Her eyes were not as cold as always, also no longer as blank as in the early days of losing her child, but something very fragile, like a thread that had just been reconnected after breaking. Henrik said softly, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I'm sorry for letting you bear so much." Franziska shook her head slightly, as if the apology no longer mattered. She replied very softly, "We bear it together. It's just each of us in our own way." Henrik smiled slightly, a tired but real smile. He looked at the road ahead, where their car was waiting. And this time, as he continued to walk, his hand was no longer hanging limply. It took his wife's hand, not tightly, but enough to say, "We still have each other, no matter what has been lost." That afternoon, Franziska returned to the house that had once been a home, now just a shelter. She opened the balcony door, sitting down on the wooden chair that Lena used to climb on every afternoon to watch her bicycle. It was still raining, small and cold. The road was deserted. No car horns, no children riding bicycles by. Henrik went into the study. He opened the second drawer on the left, where no one had touched for many months. The paper was still there, the color faded, the words written with a fingernail. 9 minutes, from when she disappeared to when I returned. He didn't read it again, just looked, for so long that his eyes blurred from not blinking. There was no sad music. There was no one standing under the window calling them down to eat dinner. There was nothing at all, except a feeling as empty as the palm of your hand when you open it and know for sure there's nothing left to hold. One January morning, the Landesforst forest donned a new coat, silver white, silent, and as infinitely deep as if it had never witnessed anything painful. Franziska parked the car on the edge of the old forest, where the red ribbons had once been stretched, where it had been the focus of every cry, search order, drone, and muddy footprint. Today, there was nothing. No one followed, No cameras, no strangers, no police. She wore a thick wool shirt, draped a fur scarf that once belonged to Lena, light yellow, slightly worn at the edges. In her hand, she held a small envelope. It was slightly wrinkled with no name written on it. Cream-colored envelope, the cheap kind bought at the supermarket near her house. Franziska held it as if inside there was something so fragile that just thinking hard about it would be enough to shatter it. The path leading into the forest was still there. Dry leaves settled into a thick layer on the ground, and the snow hadn't had time to melt to reveal the old traces. She walked slowly, her boots making small creaking sounds like someone calling in a dream. The forest still smelled of pine, the smell of dry resin mixed with morning dew, the silent, musty smell of time. She wasn't a forest enthusiast, also never believed in mystical things. But today, every step she took felt like she was returning to a place that once belonged to her daughter, where Lena's laughter used to echo in the wind, touch the pine needles, and fly away. Franziska stopped between two old pine trees. This place, according to the file, was the last coordinate that the K9 units had ever smelled. Also, the place where she used to dream of her daughter's hand being pulled towards the edge of the trees, with only the pink hat being blown upside down by the wind. She stood for a long time. Her hand was still holding the envelope, not looking around, not searching for anything anymore. No one called Lena's name. No one expected anything more. When the sun shone faintly through the gaps in the leaves, Franziska slowly sat down, not kneeling, not collapsing, just sitting as if talking to someone next to her. Then, very gently, she placed the envelope down between the two patches of moss, where the ground was still soft, not completely frozen. She didn't open it, didn't say what was inside. No one needed to know. It could be a letter. It could be a scribbled piece of paper. It could also be an old photo of Lena, a photo taken the day she went to kindergarten for the first time. Her hair braided in 2 braids and wearing a blue pleated skirt. She had intended to keep it forever. But today, she didn't want to keep anything anymore, just wanted to put it down in the place where it belonged. A light breeze blew through, very softly, like someone just walking past. A pine needle fell, spinning lightly in the air, touching Franziska's wrist, then continuing to fall to the ground. No sound. And then, no one heard it, but in her head, in her memory that would never fade, a sound appeared. Lena's laughter, clear, short, like the last time the little girl slipped on the grass and called out, "Mom, look at me!" Franziska closed her eyes, not shedding tears. No one cried at this time anymore. She stood up, lightly brushed the dust off her coat, turned her back on the 2 pine trees, not kissing the envelope, not bowing her head. No one needed farewell words for things that were no longer present in flesh and blood. On the way home, she didn't turn on the radio. Her hand didn't touch her phone. Sometimes, the wind still blew through the crack of the slightly closed car window, creating a very faint howl, like a call from the distant forest. When she got home, Henrik was standing on the balcony. He turned to look at her, for the first time in many months, with eyes that no longer reproached, also not searching for anything anymore. Just a look between 2 people who had lost a common thing and were learning how to live with that void. Franziska nodded slightly. Henrik didn't ask her where she had gone, didn't need to. That day, nothing changed. No one returned. There were no miracles, but the Landesforst forest, somehow, had calmed down. No more rustling, no more new footprints. There was nothing chasing behind anymore, only the steady breathing of the earth, and a mother learning how to continue living, not to forget, but to remember, in the gentlest way. You've probably heard the phrase, 9 minutes can change a life, but for Franziska and Henrik, those 9 minutes erased the world they knew. If you've read this far, you probably also understand the feeling of helplessness in the face of something that cannot be named, a loss without a goodbye, a question without an answer. This story isn't just a case, it's the lasting echo of what has never been closed. We tell this story based on a real incident that occurred in a forest area in Western Germany. For security reasons and respect for the victim's family, all character names, locations, and some details have been changed. But the emotions, the vibrations, the cuts, and the silence are all kept the same as when we first heard the story. No one should carry pain alone, and no one should let stories like these pass by without being heard. If this story made you stop, please share it via WhatsApp with someone you trust. Maybe they have never experienced this pain, but maybe they are the ones who need to be reminded that the deepest wounds are often located where people cannot see, and just a message can become the first light of a dialogue that someone is waiting for. We can't bring Lena back, but we can keep her, and children like her, from being forgotten. Send this story out. Who knows, somewhere, someone is listening, just at the right time.